Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I greet you all with the greetings of Islam. Assalamu alaikum. I thank you as well for coming here on this day. This will be a fantastic debate hopefully ahead of us. I just want to introduce the two debaters that we have here. We have Brother Abdullah al Andalusi from England. He is Portuguese of origin. He is an activist. We have Michael Nugent, who is a chairperson of Atheist Ireland, who is also an author and an activist for atheism in Ireland. We will begin hopefully with Michael Nugent giving a 10-minute talk, and then we'll have Brother Abdullah al Andalusi. Then we will have 2 5-minute rebuttals, and then we will have a discussion hopefully afterwards. I'd like to call Michael Nugent down to the stage.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, and always happy to take part in events like this. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, I'm going to suggest in terms of freedom of expression that the first key thing is that we should be prepared to treat people differently than we treat ideas or beliefs, that we should respect people and we should treat people with compassion and empathy and cooperation and reciprocity and fairness and justice. And we should respect people's rights to hold beliefs, even if we fundamentally disagree with those beliefs. However, I think that we should be robustly critical of the process by which people arrive at their beliefs, and we should be robustly critical of the content of people's beliefs if we disagree with them. I base my beliefs on applying reason to the currently best available evidence, and I am always open to changing my mind and changing my beliefs if I get new evidence. I don't base my belief on faith, and I don't base my belief on dogma. And I know different people attach different meanings to those words, so I'll tell you what I mean when I talk about faith and dogma. By faith, I mean believing something either because you want to believe it or you're afraid not to believe it, and believing it disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. And by dogma, I mean believing things without questioning them, or even worse, asserting that the beliefs cannot be questioned. So if somebody bases a belief on the basis of faith and dogma, as defined in that way, then I do not respect the process by which they came to their belief. I may or may not respect the content of the belief, depending on what the content is, but I do still respect their right to hold that belief. Now, a religious person may hold the opposite view. A religious person may believe that we get our truths from God, and that we as humans are not capable of determining what is the mind of God, and we have to accept what is revealed to us by whichever God you believe in as being the truth. And if a religious person believes that and genuinely believes that the creator of the universe is telling them this, then they'll be the opposite position to me, that they won't respect the way that I approach my beliefs. You won't respect coming to beliefs purely on the basis of applying our human wisdom to the best available evidence, because you will believe that that is inferior to the revealed wisdom of the God that you believe in. But given that we all share the same planet together, we have to come up with some code of conduct that enables us to live together and have a set of arrangements about freedom of expression that can accommodate all of our beliefs. What we're discussing tonight is it's somewhere in the middle of this. It's not specifically about our beliefs, although that's a significant part of it. It's about how we manifest our beliefs, how we express our beliefs. And I suggest that we each have the right to manifest and express our beliefs up to the stage that it interferes in the rights of other people. And again, we'll have a situation where there'll be difference of opinion about where we draw that line. Even if we agree in principle about that, where do we draw the line? And I go back to the original principle I'm talking about. I think that wherever we draw the line, we should add in another principle, which is that whatever freedoms or restrictions that we apply should be capable of equally being applied to religious people and atheists alike. We can't just come up with a set of restrictions that suits one of us but doesn't suit the other. We have to have a set of freedoms and restrictions that can be applied equally to all without discrimination. Now, again, where in that sense do we draw the line? I mean, there are certain things that we probably all agree on. We probably all agree you shouldn't be allowed to incite somebody to murder somebody else. We all probably agree that we shouldn't be allowed to make untrue defamatory statements about people that unfairly lowers their reputation in society. But where we're probably most sensitively at our disagreements is the issue of speech that either disrespects what we believe in or disrespects our own conscience, whether that be a religious person's conscience or an atheist's conscience. Now, I'm sure we'll hear later what things offend the consciences and beliefs of religious people and Muslims in particular. I'm going to tell you some things that insult me as an atheist, and that insult a lot of atheists, insult our feelings and go against our conscience. In the Catholic Church, the Christian Bible says that while talking to Jews about their God, that Jesus says, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do." We don't believe that's a reasonable thing to say about Jews. The Catholic Church considers homosexuality to be an objective disorder because it's ordered towards an intrinsic moral evil. We don't believe that. We think that that's offends our conscience. Pope Francis leads a church whose Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor told the BBC that atheists are not fully human. That goes against our conscience, obviously. In the Quran has passages in it that say that men can beat their wives in certain circumstances, that women's testimony is half that of a man, that women inherit half of what a man does. It suggests that you should, in certain circumstances, cut off the hands of thieves and kill disbelievers, fight non-Muslims until they're in a state of subjection. Now, all of those things go against our conscience and our beliefs. Now, you can argue, obviously, as you will, and I accept that this is a very valid argument. You can argue that these things can be interpreted in different ways. You can argue that they mean different things in the original Arabic than they do in the English translations, and they're very valid arguments. But despite those valid arguments, the way that they are published in English at the moment offends us and goes against our freedom of conscience and our freedom of belief, in the same way as things that we would say might go against your conscience, and we would say, well, we mean it in a different way. But nevertheless, the way that it is published at the moment offends and insults the feelings of many atheists. I would suggest most atheists. However, and this is the key, the fact that they are published in a way that offend our beliefs does not mean, in my opinion, that they should be banned. I'm quite happy to have both Catholics and Muslims say and publish these things that I strongly disagree with, that strongly insult the core of my ethics and my beliefs about the dignity of human beings. But I respect your right to say it, even though it offends me, because I think the key distinction between freedom of expression that should be allowed and freedom of expression that should be hindered is if it's aimed at ideas rather than individual people, then whatever belief that you want to express, you should be entitled to express it. I think the most actually, before I go on to the next one, I'll just add a little point about Islamophobia. I think the area of Islamophobia is something that I find very problematic. And the reason I find it problematic is that it combines in what it's typically meant to convey two different things. It combines attitudes towards Islam and attitudes towards Muslims. That's typically what people mean when they say Islamophobia. That it's some sort of either disrespect or fear or distrust or prejudice towards Islam and Muslims. Now, I make a very, very big distinction between those two elements. I think that you shouldn't be disrespectful towards Muslims, but that you should be entitled to be disrespectful towards Islam. In the same way as I think that you shouldn't be disrespectful towards atheists, but you should be entitled to be disrespectful towards atheism. The ideologies and beliefs and thoughts of any religion or any non-religion are very different to the people who hold those ideologies and beliefs and thoughts. And I think that's the key, whatever we're discussing in terms of freedom of expression, that's roughly where the line has to be drawn, is making that distinction. And I think the use of the term Islamophobia in a way that merges those two concepts together makes it very difficult for people like me who want to oppose discrimination against Muslims, but want to retain the right of people to be critical of Islam as an ideology, that if you're couching your opposition to one in a phrase that encompasses both, it makes it very difficult to have an intellectually nuanced discussion about it. The final thing I'll say in this part, in this opening contribution, is that there's a group called the Venice Commission, and the Venice Commission is a team of lawyers that advises countries on constitutional issues. And in 2008, they did a particularly comprehensive analysis of the balance between freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And I'm going to read just a brief summary from that report because it pretty much captures my own beliefs on it. The report concluded that incitement to hatred, including religious hatred, should be a crime. That insult to religious feelings should not be a crime, and that the offence of blasphemy should be abolished and should not be reintroduced. The report advised that the purpose of any restriction on freedom of expression must be to protect individuals rather than to protect belief systems from criticism. It said that people must be able to criticise religious ideas, even harshly and unreasonably, and even if it hurts other people's religious feelings, and I would add in there non-religious people's feelings, as long as they don't advocate hatred against an individual or against groups. The report said that democratic societies must not become hostage to the excessive sensitivities of certain individuals, and that freedom of expression must not indiscriminately retreat when facing violent reactions. Instead, the level of tolerance of these individuals and of anyone who would feel offended by the legitimate exercise of the right to freedom of expression should be raised. The report concluded democracy must not fear debate, even on the most shocking or anti-democratic ideas. It is through open discussion that these ideas should be countered and the supremacy of democratic values be demonstrated. Mutual understanding and respect can only be achieved through open debate. Persuasion, as opposed to ban or repression, is the most democratic means of preserving fundamental values. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I greet you all with the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. And if you're Catholic, Pax Vobiscum, which means the same. So I'd like to thank, first and foremost, the UCD Islamic Society for inviting me to this year, again back to Ireland, for yet another interesting debate. When they told me about it, I said, yeah, I'm up for the crack, that's an Irish expression, I don't know. I'd also like to thank my colleague and respected debate opponent, Michael Nugent, for attending and presenting his case and helping facilitate today's debate. Freedom of speech or freedom to insult? This is the question. The debate today is whether freedom of speech includes freedom to insult or not. Today's debate is not whether we believe in the freedom for humans to exercise speech. No one believes in unrestricted exercise of speech in society. Everyone here agrees, I hope, however, that inciting people to violence, murder or rape is wrong and should be illegal. So today's debate is not about whether speech should be restricted, but what the restrictions should be and for what purpose. We all believe that within the law, people should have freedom to speak. The question is, should gratuitous insult be allowed within the law? In order to answer that question, we need to ask a fundamental question. Why freedom of speech? What is the purpose of freedom of speech? If you look at the Western philosophers who came up with the Western understanding, the West didn't invent the idea of free discussion, but the Western understanding, like John Locke, John Milton, John Stuart Mill, a lot of Johns, Voltaire, Diderot, they came up with the understanding based on a very commonly expressed point, which is free speech is necessary for the pursuit of truth, for public debate and for discussion. It had a utility, especially John Stuart Mill's argument that there was behind the ability to express your ideas. Free speech was there to facilitate people finding the truth through public discussion, persuasion, and debate, but not as a license for the pursuit of voluntary Tourette syndrome. In fact, I dare say that the use of insult, derogatory and abusive speech is counterproductive to the pursuit of truth. People will find it hard to listen to someone who is ridiculed in public and belittled, no matter how strong their intellectual argument is. Now, I'm all for open intellectual debate. My organisation, the Muslim Debate Initiative, in fact, encourages it. We give platforms to even the most controversial ardent detractors of Islam, like the English Defence League, the British National Party, and radical Southern Baptists who want to vent their spleen. On the more respectable end of our invited guests, we've had intellectuals, politicians, advocates, including my esteemed co-speaker Michael Nugent, who we invited onto a platform in London to speak and debate certain topical issues. But the problem is with insult and abuse, not intellectual critique. Let us not confuse intellectual criticism with gratuitous insult that is abusive. It possesses strong psychological effects, and this is because no human being is an island unto themselves, but we as humans are social creatures who desire respect. To insult and degrade someone or their beliefs is literally degrading their equality to yourself, making them unequal or lesser equal to yourself. This is why people fight for respect, and the absence of which causes fights, if not even on the high end, revolutions. The intellectual founder of liberalism, one could argue he was the intellectual founder of liberalism, John Locke said, "Every man has commission to admonish, exhort, convince another of error, and by reasoning to draw him unto truth." But then he said that we should do this, but our words should, and I quote, should carry with it no rough usage of word or action whereby the ejected person may anywise be damnified in body or estate. Voltaire said, "I hate calumny so much that I do not want to even impute foolishness to the Turks, although I detest them as tyrants over women and enemies of the arts." I think that was inaccurate by Voltaire, but still it shows that even under his own current prejudices against the Turks, which was basically the Muslims, he didn't want to impute foolishness to them because he hated calumny. Diderot said, "Secular intolerance consists in completely ostracizing and in chasing through all sorts of violent means those that think differently from us about God and his religion. It is impious to expose a religion to the odious imputations of tyranny, of hardness, of injustice, of unsociability, even in the goal of bringing back those who might have strayed away from it." Now, the biggest straw man used to justify insult and even hate speech, but for those who do, is merely to say that we're just criticizing ideas, not people. And yet the actual cases they defend don't involve criticism of ideas, but demonization, ridicule and insult of communities and their moral exemplars. If these religious figures who were insulted were still alive, it would be ad hominem at best and slander or libel at worst. And ad hominem is a logical fallacy. And to say we cannot tell the difference between criticism and gratuitous insult is to deny the intellectual capacity of humans. Thankfully, courts today and common sense disagrees. Take the example of Charlie Hebdo, which was no mild-mannered magazine. If any of you had seen the cartoons it draws, it could give the Nazi magazine Der Stürmer a run for its money. While most of its cartoons use grossly offensive images designed to provoke and insult, lacking any intellectual substance, its cartoons against Islam and Muslims were particularly vitriolic, playing upon stereotypes of Muslims being evil, violent and barbaric, and genuinely inciting hate against an already beleaguered French community. Its cartoons were so vile and borderline inciting that a teenager who merely copied one of the front covers of Charlie Hebdo, which showed a Muslim Brotherhood demonstrator being shot to death in Egypt with the mocking label, "The Quran is rubbish, it doesn't stop bullets," and merely substituted the Quran for a Charlie Hebdo magazine and substituted the Muslim Brotherhood man for a Charlie Hebdo cartoonist, was arrested in France on charges of justifying terrorism, and he just parodied the actual front cover of a Charlie Hebdo magazine. Another hypocrisy in the nail, a hypocritical nail in the coffin of French claims to support equal and free speech. Now let my opponent tell us how depicting a religious figure naked on all fours with a depiction of his anus in a star shape, along with a caption, "A new star is born," possesses any merit other than to ridicule and hate. That was one of the cartoons in the Charlie Hebdo magazine. I'm not even going to say who they tried to impute that was, but what benefit does that have? What intellectual critique does that produce? And to say, and to continue, and it's not just me arguing this. Many Western philosophers, current ones, and Western governments have argued and understood the need for restrictions on hate speech, ridicule, and offence. Yes, offence, actual word used. In UK, one cannot cause gross offence according to the Malicious Communications Act. You cannot create an offensive environment for a member of the opposite sex under the sexual harassment laws. One could say, isn't offence subjective? And yet it's part of English law. One cannot insult or use abusive expressions of race, gender and sexual orientation in the UK, or incite hatred against people based upon their religion. In Ireland, it also includes that one cannot insult or abuse anyone for any identity or characteristic, including their religion, and it uses the prohibition against insult and abuse as stated in the statute law. Likewise, verbal abuse is restricted and criminalised under laws that protect people from domestic abuse. Well, now people who have vested interests in any one of these pastimes usually tend to argue vociferously against them. A wife abuser will probably argue against restrictions on their free speech to verbally abuse their wife. Not threatening the wife, not inciting to violence, just verbally abusing the wife. So, it's my free speech. Would we all agree? A racist would probably argue against racial hate laws, and they said that restricts his free speech or her free speech. A homophobe would argue the same against anti-homophobia hate laws. A sexist will argue against verbal sexual abuse or sexual harassment on the sexual harassment laws. And it's unsurprising, at times we see that atheists are leading the argument against religious hate speech laws or blasphemy laws. Now, for my opponent to be consistent, if insult be acceptable means of communication, they must also advocate decriminalisation of expressions of racism, verbal domestic abuse, expressions of homophobia, and verbal sexual harassment, because these all don't involve incitement to murder or violence. They're just purely verbal, purely expressions. When Women's Refuge Sonas Housing, which I believe is an Irish women's refuge organisation, they said verbal abuse is as damaging as violence. Will we respond to them, tell these abused women to just toughen up and accept criticism from their spouses? No. Humans should respect each other. And if we truly believe that dignity is a right for all humans, then we should protect it from those who would deny that right. Thank you.
The first thing I'll say about racism and homophobia, which I'm opposed to, I spent yesterday speaking to the Irish Skeptic Society on the topic of how to build ethical and robust atheist and skeptic groups. And I'm strongly in favour of organisations not only being internally consistent with what they're doing, but also actively involving themselves in community outreach and in working with other groups who, like atheists in Ireland, are discriminated against. And that would include racial minorities, and it would include gay people in Ireland. It would also obviously include victims of domestic violence, and particularly women who are victims of domestic violence. We had a conference a couple of years ago here on empowering women through secularism. So we're very strongly, not only in favour of, but actively involved in work to protect and work with other rights groups who represent other minorities in Ireland to protect their rights. And we feel that it's perfectly consistent with that to support the idea of freedom of expression in criticising ideas. And the distinction between racism and homophobia and sexism on the one hand and criticism of religion on the other hand is that religion is something that you can either choose to be involved in or choose not to be involved in, that you can change your religious beliefs. As a supporter of Bohemians Football Club here in Dublin, I often say that football is worse than religion, because you can change your religion, but you can't change your football team. But another thing that you can't change is your gender, you can't change your race, and you can't change your sexual orientation. And so attacking those attributes of a person's being are attacking something that they cannot change, and that is not an idea, but is just part of who they are. Whereas religion is something that, however strongly you are attached to it, the evidence is there that it is possible to change your religious belief. So that's one distinction that I would make. The other kind of core thing really is if you're not going to have a set of criteria that can be equally applied to everybody, the question then arises, who judges? Who decides? Is it decided in accordance with an atheistic belief system? Is it decided in accordance with an Islamic belief system, or how is it decided? The only way that in a society where everybody lives together that you can fairly determine where to draw the line is again, if I go back to the Venice report, I'll give another quote from the Venice report that I think is relevant here. The report found that it is not exclusively or even primarily for the courts to find the right balance between freedom of religion and freedom of expression, but rather for society at large through rational discussions between all parts of society, including believers and non-believers. And this is essentially what we're doing here today. This is part of that process, and it's a very useful part of that process. But let's not kid ourselves in terms of some of these issues. What the background is. I mean, one of the background reasons why freedom of expression with regards to Islam is so significant in the world today is that there are a minority of Muslims, not acting as Muslims, but acting as what I would term Islamists in terms of ideology, who, to put it diplomatically, react disproportionately when people say things that offend them. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think that we would be having this discussion with the same level of urgency as we are. So I think if we're going to talk about trying to be consistent in protecting human rights on an overall basis and freedom of expression as part of that, I think we also have to discourage people from reacting disproportionately when their beliefs are offended. We have, for example, in our blasphemy law here in Ireland that we're campaigning against, there's a clause in that the first test of our blasphemy law is that something is grossly offensive or abusive in relation to matters held sacred by any religion, thereby causing outrage among a substantial number of adherents of that religion. And so the first test in our blasphemy law of whether something is blasphemous is whether or not it causes outrage. Now, I think that that's irresponsible. I don't think that the law should be encouraging people to show outrage when something is said that offends them. I think the law should be encouraging people to react more proportionately. Even if the law is trying to prevent people from saying things, I don't think incentivising outrage, particularly in such a volatile situation as we are in Europe at the moment, where outrage can escalate into far worse than outrage. The point you're making about Charlie Hebdo, I'll finish off on. I haven't seen the parody of the front cover, but I support the right of Charlie Hebdo to produce those cartoons, and I would therefore support the right of somebody to do a parody of those cartoons. I have mixed feelings about Charlie Hebdo cartoons. I've gone over a lot of cartoons in the publication. They're not things that I would personally draw myself. I actually used to be a cartoonist in a previous existence. They're not things that I would personally draw myself, but I respect their right to draw those cartoons. I think they are attacking ideologies rather than Muslims, and there are cartoons within Charlie Hebdo attacking and satirising the French government and police for their treatment of Muslim immigrants. Charlie Hebdo is not a right-wing publication, it's a left-wing, anti-right-wing publication, and it is as supportive of the rights of Muslim immigrants as people as it is hostile to the ideology of Islam within France and in today's society. The other thing that is typically shown about Charlie Hebdo is a cartoon of a politician in France shown as a monkey. And that cartoon has been regularly circulated, suggesting that shows that Charlie Hebdo is racist. Actually, what that cartoon was about was satirising a right-wing politician in France who had described that politician as a monkey. and associating the image of that politician as a monkey with the logo and the poster style of that political party. So that was actually a satirical attack saying these are the people who are calling these people monkeys. It wasn't a racist cartoon, it was an anti-racist cartoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Just to talk about the ideas that were brought up. First and foremost, I think we can all rationally agree that speech has a connection with action, and hence that's why you prohibit incitement to hatred. If you say we should be, islands unto ourselves, so even if anyone can say anything and you shouldn't take offence, it shouldn't affect you, then you should, by the same logic, then decriminalise incitement to murder, incitement to do crimes, because you could always choose not to do it, right? So why is it criminalised to actually incite or to tell people to do it? Surely you could say, well, they had their choice to do it or not. There is an inherent connection. But I want to ask a more fundamental question again. Why is there hate speech laws, of which my opponent also agrees with these hate speech laws against sexism and racism and homophobia? Why? Well, we know why. It's because it's not just discriminatory, it's you remove the dignity of people by using speech which is hateful. And that's why they remove it, because it hurts the person psychologically when you insult them for their race, you insult them for their gender, or use sexual harassment or verbal abuse as part of domestic abuse. That's why it's prohibited. So then I say, well, now we've agreed on that principle. Hopefully, if someone wants to contest that, then let's go just the next logical step, or rather, let's equalise it to the issues of religion. Now, when I say about religion, I don't mean that you can't criticise religion. I don't mean you can't say someone on our platform, a debater, a Christian debater, said that Muhammad was a rapist. Obviously, as a Muslim, I strongly disagree. But he was a Southern Baptist Christian. He was very fiery, as they are, and he made this point. He had another debate with us because for that was what he believed, and he didn't intend. It was clear he wasn't intending to be insulting. This was what he was expressing his opinion, and we refuted him. I don't view that as insult or gratuitous insult at all. So even though it's a very strongly worded statement. So there is a difference between that, which is clear intellectual criticism, and deliberate insult. And courts go through this all the time. I mean, one could argue, well, what is a offensive environment? What does that mean? Or what does grossly offensive mean? What does hate mean? How do you prove someone intended to say hatred against a black person or against a white person or against a person who is called a homosexual or whatever labels are used in the law? Well, the courts decide that all the time. And if you say it's unclear that we can't decide this, then again remove all these laws. Be consistent and remove all these laws and say we can't. It's too unclear, so so we can't judge by these things. And courts look at intent. They try to find strong evidence of intent to cause abuse, to insult, or to degrade and cause offence. And that is a very simple and rational criteria, which I agree with. But I say that, how is religion any less part of your identity than your race? I'd actually argue the opposite. Religion is really all your belief system, even if it's not a religion, which informs your morals, which informs how you view the world, what is good and what is bad. I'd argue that defines you more than just the superficialities of the colour of your skin or just your particular sexual preference, which is not really a culture in of itself. It's just a particular preference, or your gender. I would say that your chosen beliefs, which inform your character, define you far more than these superficialities which are protected under law. And of course, in UK law and in Irish law and in many laws, religion is also protected alongside its other identities. So it's not just me saying this, but legal minds have come to the same understanding too. My colleague mentioned the report of, who was it, this report?
The Venice Commission. The
Venice Commission, where they said, the importance of rational discussion. I agree. Rational discussion, not pictures of religious figures on all fours naked with their anus out saying, a new star is born. That's not rational discussion. I agree with the statement of the Venice Commission. It is said that only Islamists reacted to this outrage. Well, not really. When you see that the Catholic Church Christians, even people of Jews, and many people have reacted with outrage, with many insults, abuses against things they hold sacred. Now, I want to reaffirm something. I'm not against intellectual criticism. As I said, I think I've demonstrated my credentials by practice. And Muslim Debate Initiative, we host many debates where it's very strong intellectual criticism, and that's great. But gratuitous insult is a different animal altogether. And so a person can talk about gender in an intellectual way. Even the person, I even saw the discussions where they say, is there any evidence to show that race actually determines intelligence or has any effect on intelligence? I've seen academics discuss that. All right? I don't find it offensive, and it's not really the intent to be insulting. But if you were to say that white people, black people, blue people are not equal and don't deserve the same rights, or they are evil, or they are X, Y, and Z, then that should be outlawed. So there's a clear distinction between intellectual critique and gratuitous insult, and we all know this. I think the other points that were brought up, I just want to make some interesting other points. The US is considered to be more liberal, perhaps, or more libertarian, leaning on the libertarian side than Europe. But even in the US, which you can actually say, you can be racist and you can be homophobic and you can express it, and you won't get any consequences, unless maybe from your workplace, perhaps. But even they have rules against obscenity. There's laws against obscenity, laws against fighting words. Words, if you were to go up to someone and insult their mother and they punch you, that person is not prosecutable because you incited them to violence. Even though, just by what you said. So what you said incites someone to violence, and that person will be prosecuted because you were the one that incited it, based on you causing grievous abuse to that person, causing insult to that person. Interesting, even America, more liberal than Europe, still prohibits expressions of speech which in of themselves are not incitement to violence, not even hate speech. Obscenity law. It's interesting, obscenity. Even John Locke actually discussed obscenity and didn't allow it. And I'll finish based on what Jeremy Bentham, who's very materialist in his moral calculations. Jeremy Bentham said something very interesting. He said, all exhibitions which, being to the minds of individuals taken in any considerate number, productive of uneasiness on a religious account, are offered to their senses in such a manner as that that the unpleasant sensation produced by them, whatever it be, is unavoidable. All such acts are, in my view of the matter, objects calling for the prevention by means of punishment. So even the very materialist Jeremy Bentham said that there should be laws to prevent gratuitous insult and inciting psychological damage upon people. And I really think that all I really call for is a consistency on the matter. If we do it for superficial things, we should always do it for other things. But at the same time, we all rationally know the difference between intellectual critique, which I am 110% for. I even support EDL having a platform with us when people will actually try to stop it, actually. So you know, we've gone out of our way when people are prevented from speech. We actually try to give them a platform, just so that was the best way to engage them, is by debating them. And they were prevented by a campaign to stop us from doing so. But I would also say this: Charlie Hebdo are no exemplars of free speech either. They fired, I think, Maurice Sine, who produced a cartoon. They said it was a cartoon of a politician, I believe, which they said it was anti-Semitic. And they fired him. So Charlie Hebdo don't really care about free speech. In fact, and yes, they attack different religions, but if you look at Charlie Hebdo's cartoons, they actually attacked Islam much more in France, showing the pictures of Arabs with a hook nose, and very actually racist against Arabs. You could reasonably argue if they did the same with Jews in the same shape, same images, you'd actually say that was being racist. So I don't think that Charlie Hebdo has any moral platform here to be defended on this matter. So anyway, so I'll just end with this. There is one argument people say is that, well, if we attack the moral exemplars of a religion, prophets and so on and so forth, isn't this intellectual criticism? How can you be offended by that? And I say, look, yeah, I accept intellectual criticism, but if you attack moral exemplars in a manner which is deliberate to produce insult, like the Charlie Hebdo cartoon of a naked person on all fours and so on and so forth, that's not intellectual critique. And if that was in a living person, they could sue them for libel, for slander, for a whole number of different laws for insult. So I would say this: all I'm arguing is that we already agree with the principles that you can restrict speech, which is not necessarily inciting violence deliberately. Now the question is, are we going to be consistent or not? Thank you.
Okay, well, could I start the discussion then by asking, when you were saying that you supported a section of the Venice Commission report, that the whole point of the Venice Commission report was to deal with the nuances of a whole load of issues and come up with a balance. So I mean, really, with regards to the Venice Commission report, you should really accept its entirety, or not accept its entirety, because obviously there will be individual bits that each group will agree with because it's trying to find a balance. So what are your thoughts on the entirety of it, on the general conclusion that incitement to hatred, including religious hatred, should be a crime, that insult to religious feelings should not be a crime, and that the offence of blasphemy should be abolished? On that overall package, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, what I said I agreed with, and I literally just heard it as you, for the first time when you said it, was when they tried to say that the purpose was for rational discussion. And I said, well, okay, now let's look at the purpose and see if the measure that they propose fits the purpose. So if you had a society where people were insulting things which are held sacred, which can include their mothers, I would say that people hold their mothers sacred. It doesn't have to be a spiritual being per se or whatever. It can be things which you hold personally sacred. Would that be conducive to rational discussion? Does it serve rational discussion? Is it itself rational discussion? And no, it's not. So I see no rational reason why a society should commit gratuitous insult, provided, of course, that there should be safeguards, of course, to this, which there already are. The courts have to prove intent. I think in one iteration or guidance on the Irish blasphemy law, it was sole intent. One discussion, or as well, one discussion says just intent as part of it. But I'm all for putting a high level of standards, a high level of burden of proof to protect people from the grey areas. But for those who are clearly just gratuitously insulting, it should be criminalised like any other form of verbal abuse or other types of abuse which are criminalised in most Western systems.
And when you were saying that, I don't want to dominate the questions, but John, you can ask me as well, but when you were saying that people's beliefs are central to them in a way that's more central than, say, their skin colour or their gender, first of all, do you include atheists in that? That atheist beliefs are essential? I mean, can you read aside your conscience? So obviously, presumably, there are atheists who follow their conscience, and believing in not believing in God wasn't really a choice for them. They just, for them, how they perceive it anyway. Yeah. And so, what are your thoughts then on sacred scriptures and people from religions saying things? For example, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor saying that atheists are not fully human, or the Quran having passages about killing unbelievers. The issue of the Quran, unbelievers, the word kuffar has a number of translations depending on its context. The actual same word can be used in one paragraph 3 times and have 3 different meanings, depending on how it is referring to. It can refer to farmers, for example, those who cover, or it can refer to disbelievers, or it can refer to just being a non-Muslim, or it can refer to those who are actively at war with Muslims or trying to kill Muslims. So I would disagree with anything that says go out and kill people just because they have a different belief. Yeah. But the Quran doesn't say that, and neither the Bible nor the Old Testament is to my knowledge. But as for that, what that cardinal said, the cardinal isn't God or isn't a religious scripture in of himself, and if he says that atheists are not fully human, then obviously it could be a case for the courts, yeah. But let's say so. And I'm accepting what you're saying there. That if I'm saying that there are passages in the Quran, and say those comments with Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, that in the form in which they are published, we can't see the original Arabic. We just see the English translation that we see. In the form that they are published to us, are deeply offensive to us and to the core of our being. Do you think that in the form that they are published, that it's reasonable that they should be published in that way?
Well, you know what? I think we always conflate offence with intent to insult. I'm not talking about offence. Okay. Offence is vague. It can be, people can say they're offended on different things. I don't really care about offence. I care about intent to insult. I'll give you an example, right? So if you see someone on the street and comes up to you and goes and bites their thumb like this at you, you're not going to be offended or insulted. You think like, what's this person? A bit crazy guy. But in Italy, you know, if you're an Italian person, that's an insult. basically. Or with Greeks, you show your palm up to a person, that's an insult. But it's about the intent. But if you knew, you weren't Italian, but an Italian person came up to you and did that, you knew what that meant, you would take insult from that, because you know that was their intent. And when people say, no offense intended, you say none taken, that common expression, you are willing to forgive people for that, because if they don't intend to offend you, then they're not really disrespecting you or making you less than them. It's just, it's just how it is.
How do you determine that intent? Who determines intent? I mean, in the same way as the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists would say very sincerely that they don't intend to insult. What they intend to do is to convey in a provocative way a particular belief about a particular ideology. They're saying they're not intending to. It's as in your example of the Quran isn't intending to insult my beliefs, but I perceive it as insulting my belief. Now, so our difference seems to be in that I'm happy to say that that's my problem. My perception of it is my problem. And you're entitled to publish it, whereas you seem to be assuming intent, and on the basis of assuming the intent, saying, I don't know what you're saying, then that therefore it should be banned, or the intent should be improved.
Well, the intent should be improved. I mean, you've heard of the legal concept of mens rea.
Yeah.
Mens rea legal concept, for those who are lawyers or budding lawyers in the audiences, a malice of intent, basically, that you intended to do a crime, maliciously. So mens rea is a legal concept which is used in issues of murder cases and theft and so on and so forth. You have to show there was criminal intent by the individual. So courts do it all the time, and I say, look, put the burden of proof really high, to protect people from the grey areas, so people who you can't be sure. But when it's absolutely clear, so if someone scrawled on the wall somewhere saying that I think Tommy's mum is a woman of ill repute, let's just say, I think it's very clear to say that he wasn't just expressing an artistic perspective, or I'm being provocative to express the inner existence. No, you're not. You're being insulting, and I think it's very clear cut from the manifestation. But I want to ask you a point, which is, do you think that verbal abuse in domestic cases is allowed or should be allowed?
Can you give me an example?
Well, that's the thing, verbal abuse, right? So verbal abuse could be that, let's say, a husband, telling his wife that she's, again, a woman of ill repute, using worse language than that, should we say, every day having a go at her, putting her down, saying she's worthless, or a whole number of things. I mean, and sorry, I don't want to enumerate points, but do you think that should be allowed as an expression of free speech?
I think it should be a reason for the woman to leave that husband, and I think that if it reaches a stage that it is so oppressive as to be equivalent to physical violence, if it's psychological violence to the extent that it's the equivalent of physical violence, then I think that should be outlawed. Yeah.
So then, would you accept then that psychological harm is a valid harm as well as physical harm? At
a certain degree of scale. But I don't think that publishing a cartoon generally to the population for people who choose to pick it up and or not pick it up and look at it is the same thing as somebody who is living with somebody and on a continuous daily basis in that enclosed environment, using those oppressive measures.
But then if you say that,
so there's a scale. Yeah. Would you accept that there's a scale and that somewhere on either end that there's extremes and there's a grey area in the middle?
Well, I mean, personally, from the Islamic perspective, even one word of insult to a spouse is wrong and is potentially criminalisable under Islamic law. But you can't insult.
But you can't beat your wife.
You can't gratuitously beat your wife and what I'm going to beat.
Not gratuitously, but you can under certain circumstances, according to the Quran.
Well, actually, the Quran is actually okay. Without changing topic, though, that's to do with how the Quran and family affairs. But no, the Quran doesn't advocate that go forth and beat your wife. No.
No, but it does create circumstances under which, at the end of the scale of other things,
the Quran
you
creates
can beat your wife.
equal circumstances by which the man can be beaten for being a negligent, abusive husband too, or even just negligent husband, he can be beaten. So
by his wife?
In one case, actually, yes, but a woman can actually go. A woman came to Prophet Muhammad and said that my husband was abusive, so he said I beat him. So one could say it's abusing your husband's there, but in most cases, in Islam. Depending on what the actions of the husband is, yes. And likewise with, but more importantly, Islam gives the feature of a court. A woman can take a husband to court for being negligent or abusive, and he can receive corporal punishment. But I don't want to digress with Islamic law.
Okay, just one thing before we go off that.
This is about free speech, not about domestic policy.
We did then go into the equivalence of psychological repression and violence.
Just on the scale issue, though, because you mentioned the scale issue. If you say it's an issue of a scale, then that by your own definition, that's also unclear, because then at what point in the scale, where do you say one is wrong, one is right, this is too much, too little? I say, well, look, because you yourself, you're arguing that you can't restrict speech in cases where you say there is not lack of clarity, yet you yourself are advocating a scale which by definition will produce, unclear situations.
Of course, because life is complex. But where I would draw the line, first of all, in terms of the beating, whether it's a man beating his wife or a wife beating her husband, I don't think either of those should be allowed. When you're into oppressive psychological treatment that it has the same harmful equivalent as physical violence, I think that should be illegal. When you go down the scale and outside of the environment of two people living in the same house and neither being able effectively to escape from the environment, and you go into the public domain, once you go into the public domain, at the far end of the public domain you have publications that people can choose whether or not they want to read. I think in publications that people can choose whether or not they want to read, that's very much on the liberal end of the spectrum for me, that you can publish whatever you want, and if somebody doesn't want to look at it, they don't look at it. Now, if that publication, however, incites people to harm individual people as opposed to criticising ideas that people have, then I think that's where you start to get into the grey area. Now, how you deal with the grey area is for society to determine, and for society to determine on the basis of a compilation of all of our views, not merely liberals saying you have to do it our way or Muslims saying you have to do it our way. You have to come up with some sort of system that everybody can adhere to, which will involve compromise. Will involve compromise from everybody. And even if you believe that the creator of the universe is telling you that you have to do it this way, sure, then lead your own life on that basis. But you shouldn't insist that others lead their life on the basis of what you believe the creator of the universe is telling you.
Okay, no one's saying that people should follow other people's laws per se. It's just about the issue of the universal issue of human respect. One cannot say, well, look, if you believe in respect, that's just your religion. I don't believe in respect for humans. And it's like, well, no, because you can't live in society without respect informing at some level the law system. But I want to get back to what you mentioned about if you can avoid a publication, then it shouldn't be criminalised. So then, if there's a publication that was inciting hatred against black people, hatred against Jews, hatred against people who are identified as gay, or people who are women or men, would you argue that should be permitted if the publication does not necessarily have to be bought by everyone? So as long as you can avoid buying it,
no, I think that if it does incite hatred against people on the basis of any of their attributes, then I think that should be outlawed. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying that but if there are cartoons that are attacking ideas, ridiculing ideas, satirising ideas, even in an offensive way, I think that should be allowed if it's attacking ideas and ideologies. And the distinction that I would make, and I won't say it about Islam to make it easier for you to appreciate, that if people attack me as an atheist, then I have a problem with that. If people attack the idea of atheism and ridicule the idea of atheism and insult the idea of atheism, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to try and get them locked up, I'm not going to try and get them fined, and I'm not going to try and get them killed. And that I think is the distinction, is the distinction between ideas and people. I think people should be protected from harm. Ideas should be always open to robust criticism, including ridicule, if people want to use ridicule.
Okay, no one's arguing that ideas which are disembodied things should be protected from criticism and so on, and even ridicule for the sake of intellectual purposes for certain. But when it comes to people, to moral exemplars, figures, people they hold dear, people's mothers, these are not they're not ideas. They're people. Whether the mother is alive or dead is not really the question to the individual. But just to ask you a question. So let's say there was a publication that said, let's say that okay, white people's skin color is funny. It's not really necessarily inciting hatred per se. Or let's make it more visceral, because obviously that's people get away with making jibes about white people. So all right, let's say black people's skin color is funny, or blue people's skin color is funny, or red people, whatever, right? Now the statement itself doesn't necessarily incite hatred, but it's ridicule and insulting an aspect of a group of people. Would you support that? Would you say that shouldn't be criminalised?
That's a tough one. If somebody says that black people's skin is funny, I think that's just a stupid statement.
Or strange, or of course. But would you support their right to publish this?
I think I'd probably laugh at them for making a statement. I think you probably need to go more into statements that are, that are trying to incite people to dislike black people. If that was the case, I definitely think that it should be outlawed.
Oh, actually, I had another example. There was an infamous sign during the 1960s or 70s where it said, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, right? Which was very offensive and insulting. Now, okay, that might be, you might say that's inciting hatred perhaps, but what if there was a sign that said that a certain skin color of people, they just look like monkeys? But not necessarily that you should hate monkeys per se, or monkeys aren't a hated animal per se. But X, Y, and Z skin looks like monkeys. Do you think that should be allowable to be published? And would you support the right of people to publish that statement?
Again, I'm not sure what the statement is. The statement is that people's skin makes them look like a monkey.
Oh yeah, someone made a declaration, maybe as a front cover or something, saying that this, or some far right group said, X, Y, and Z people, skin colour, it makes them look like monkeys.
Well, that actually is the example of that happened in France, that Charlie Hebdo was satirising. Which
well, a politician, but not a race or a commonly shared identity. I mean, do you think that should be prohibited, or would you support the right of people to publish statements like that? Just not necessarily support the statement, just support the right of people to publish that statement.
Well, I tend to be quite liberal in terms of what people can publish. So I would look at it on the basis of seeing if it is wise to allow it to be published, rather than looking at the basis of I want to censor this. But certainly once, if in my view, once it strays into the realm of inciting hatred, that's where I would draw the line. I'd have to see an actual example to evaluate it.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned, wisdom is something that would be one of the factors that you'd look into, and that's really precisely what I'm saying in this discussion. You look at the wisdom of something. You look at, will it cause more harm than good? Does it fit with what is the rational purpose of free speech, which is to basically the pursuit of truth or the expression of opinions on values and ideas. And as I said, I mean, just to kind of clarify. So certainly our organisation, as I reiterate for the F time, I mean, we support open criticism of ideas and beliefs. And I once saw you made a funny comment at the UCD debate about one particular religion whose God came down to earth, died, and they wrote a book about it. And okay, I mean, obviously, I personally wouldn't use that statement myself, but I take that as an expression of your opinion. Your intellectual opinion. So I think all of us here, reasonable individuals, and the law mentions that what would a reasonable individual interpret from any of these cases, that I think the law has the appropriate already safeguards, the common sense, and the understanding to distinguish between insult and gross offence, as well as versus intellectual criticism. I think that the people understand this already, and people realise that. And wouldn't you agree that maybe it would be better for a more cohesive society that, you have a free market of ideas, that's great, have all this debate, but wisdom and refrain from insult, gratuitous insult, demonization, defamation of other people.
Well, I agree. I mean, I would not only would I refrain from doing that myself, but going back to your earlier example, if people were making those statements, whatever my views, having looked at it about whether they should be entitled to publish it, I would actively campaign against that ideology, and I would actively encourage people not to agree with that type of idea, even if I believe that they should be entitled to publish it, and to a certain extent, whether I think it should be published or not is neither here nor there, because I might be mistaken. The reason that we have a legal system is to try to move away from the individual biases that we all have. And I would have a bias towards liberalism, other people would have a bias towards conservatism. And ultimately, one of the purposes of the legal system is to try and remove those prejudices and to try and have a set of criteria that can be applied objectively to everybody, irrespective of what their beliefs are.
I think we're agreeing actually quite a lot, because I agree. So the whole point is, let's put it to the legal system. I don't want to be the arbiter of what's right and wrong. I'm not a judge, and I'm far from it. But to put it to the courts, for them to decide as to what constitutes gross offence, which already is. I mean, England doesn't have a blasphemy law, as you know. We got rid of it not so long ago. Actually, it wasn't very relatively recently. But what the laws which there are, like the Malicious Communications Act, which forbid gross offence, for example, which is part. It's not a religiously inspired law. It's just causing gross offence, or the US law against obscenity as well, which are just things which are about expressions which are not necessarily incitement to violence per se, but they cause psychological harm to people, individuals, to communities, to groups. Would you agree or disagree with those particular laws?
Give me an example.
So the laws against obscenity, for example, in the United States, against fighting words, and in the UK, the law against gross offence.
Well, obscenity is typically used in terms of pornography. I don't have any problem with pornography. I think people should be entitled to look at pornography. I think if the pornography exploits people, I certainly would be opposed to child pornography. I would be opposed to any pornography that involves people being forced into pornography. But I think that the act of having sex is not illegal, and it's pretty strange that it's illegal to portray something that isn't illegal to do. Whereas it is illegal to kill people, yet it's not illegal to have movies that demonstrate people killing people. So in terms of obscenity, I'd be quite liberal. Interestingly enough, there was a study done in terms of downloading of pornography internationally, and in order to try and balance out the fact that different countries have different values, they just focused on 3 types of pornography that are illegal almost everywhere and that are frowned upon almost everywhere, which was child pornography, rape pornography, and bestiality. And the study found that 8 of the 10 countries in which most of the downloads of that type of pornography occurred were Islamic countries. I don't know what to make of that, but it seemed quite a disproportionate thing to me, but that was the outcome of that. Can I ask you just one thing before we move off this? Because we were talking about the legal system, and because the other thing in terms of the legal system is that there are very different legal systems in Islamic countries than in secular democracies.
I would dispute the term Islamic country, but
okay. Well, there are very different legal systems in some countries than in others. Okay, so, and if I take 2 examples, I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I accept that you probably believe that the people shouldn't have said the things that they've said, but whether you think that the punishments are proportionate. One is the case of Raif Badawi, who's currently who in fact is a Muslim, who in Saudi Arabia is currently sentenced to be flogged every week for 20 weeks, although it has been postponed after the first one for a while, but there's now talk of retrying him and possibly him being possibly a death penalty being sought. The second one is Asia Bibi, who's a Christian woman in Pakistan who was involved in a dispute with co-workers who were Muslims, was accused of saying something about Jesus having done more for people than Muhammad, and who is currently facing execution for saying that in Pakistan. And 2 politicians in Pakistan, one the governor of Punjab, who was a Muslim, and the other the minorities minister in the Pakistani government, who was a Christian, both of whom spoke up for Asia Bibi and against what they considered to be the disproportionate punishment. Both of them were murdered, one of them by his own bodyguard, and that person, when he was brought to court, had other lawyers throwing rose petals in front of him as he went into court to be tried for murdering his governor. So just in terms of those, like to us in Ireland, and I'm sure to most people in England, those would seem to be disproportionate penalties, even if you accept that it's wrong to blaspheme.
Okay, I mean, before I answer, I just want to make a quick point about the pornography. I would argue, and I think, and some feminists, although mainstream feminists would say it's pornography is the freedom of expression of the sexuality, of the individuality of the woman, or something like this. But some feminists do argue that it creates sexual objectification and is degrading of women, and they want to ban it, they want to oppose it. And certainly in Islam, we'd consider the public portrayal of sex, certainly that kind of, certainly gratuitously, which is it's not for a rational reason, it would serve no purpose and would be counterproductive and cause problems for expectations in sex, relationships and so on, but that's a different discussion which we won't entertain today. So I would disagree with the issue of pornography off the bat. But as for Raif Badawi and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, these are post-colonial constructs. The Pakistani blasphemy law was borrowed from the old Victorian era blasphemy law of England. Right, Pakistan got it from England, so you can blame England, I suppose, for
we
that.
typically do here.
Yeah. But I'm against the Victorian formulation and understanding of blasphemy. I would like to posit that throughout Islamic civilization there was books published criticizing Islam, calling the Prophet Muhammad a false prophet by Christians living in the Muslim world, in Antioch, in Syria, in Iraq. St. John of Damascus, Catholic saint. Where is he from? Well, the answer's in the name, Damascus. So these are, no one gave a death fatwa against them, say kill them for whatever, because it was expected that Christians or non-Muslims would hold these opinions, and their expression of them was viewed as intellectual critique and debate, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, set up the first Muslim-Christian debate, was for 3 days in the mosque, and after that, I mean, the Christians rejected him to his face, in essence calling him a false prophet, in a way almost alluding to him being a liar. And what did the Prophet do? He said, well, if you want to pray in the mosque before going back home, you can go. And that was how he dealt with it. And that gave us an example for us to follow as Muslims. So I'm against how Pakistan blasphemy law is used. It's mostly used politically. Certainly there are many factions within Pakistan, and they use it against each other all the time. You had a Salafi guy, it was used against him because he was a Salafi and he wasn't, I think, a Naqshbandi, and there was all these different sectarian groups using it against each other. So I'm against the Pakistani blasphemy law as it's formulated and as it was borrowed from the British. As for Raif Badawi, well, in Saudi Arabia considers the Muslim Brotherhood to be terrorists, and they're a non-violent political group. So I really wouldn't take whatever Saudi Arabia does seriously. I'd take it with a pinch of salt, pepper, and some paprika. All right. So I don't really have any. I'm not an apologist of Saudi Arabia by any means. And I think that Raif Badawi didn't do blasphemy just because he declared himself to be a liberal, or he's a secular liberal. I mean, as for secular liberalism itself, and so that's a different discussion. But I disagree that he was a blasphemer just because he said he's a liberal. So I disagree with that. So that would be my answer. But I suppose I think in many cases I'm getting the feeling we agree in principle, but it's just our interpretation of what we judge to be falling foul of said principles. All I wanted to say is that, I mean, humans identify, and would you agree that humans identify with many different kinds of identity? So people might say, I'm a black person, or I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I heard one feminist say that her gender was her nation. So these identity groups, which people feel part of and feel that they actually define who they are, that they should deserve some protection, not from intellectual criticism at all. No protection, no one should be protected from that, but just protection from gratuitous insult which would demean them and part of who they are. Would you agree with the basic principle?
Well, I think if you're going into a kind of grey area between where you're saying that a person's identity is close to is so close to their religion, that insulting their religion is insulting them. Is that roughly what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that according to the second discourse, religion would be just another identity group like race, like gender, like sexual preference.
Well, I would look this way. If people were straying into criticising ideas in such a way as it was also gratuitously insulting people, okay, then I would be opposed to them doing that, and I would challenge them doing that using my own freedom of speech to say I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do, but I don't think that they should be outlawed from saying that. If you follow that distinction.
Why would you make that distinction?
Because if they're attacking ideas, I think they're entitled to attack ideas, even if the ideas insult the religious or non-religious sensitivities of people. So if they were gratuitously insulting the religious or non-religious sensitivities of people, I would be opposed to that personally, but I wouldn't outlaw it. I would just argue against them and say you shouldn't do that.
So do you think then maybe expressions of, let's say, of racism shouldn't be outlawed, but maybe just contested socially or contested? No,
because I make a distinction between racism and religion, because you can change your religion, but you can't change your race.
Well, I don't think you can. I mean, can you really change your conscience? Do you think you could just literally decide right now to believe in God and be a devout?
Well, if you came through the door here, I would go, right, I was mistaken. I mean, I don't have any inherent desire for there to be no God. You know, it's just for me, that's where the evidence has led me, and if I got new evidence that changed my mind, I'd be happy to change my mind.
So you're saying it's outside your control, until new evidence comes?
Until new evidence, yeah.
So then it's the same as race, it's the same as...
No, it doesn't matter what evidence you get, unless you're Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, actually. Unless you're Michael Jackson, unless you can afford that. Well, would you say then that you can be sexist because people can be transgender, that you can change your gender now, apparently?
We've been told we have a minute left. I don't think we're going to sort that out in a minute.
All right, okay. I mean, as I said, one then could argue that because transgender operations allow people to change their gender or decide their gender, now you have this strange, was it cisgender and not, I don't know whether the new postmodernist liberal terminology is for this stuff. But now one could argue then, if by your principle maybe, that well, now you can choose your gender, so now sexism is on the table. Now you should decriminalise it because you can choose your gender.
Are we summating, by the way, or what are we?
I think we'll open it up to the floor.
Okay, all right.
Questions. First of all, I think there's a bit of a cheap dog whistle for Michael to criticise domestic violence in Ireland by linking domestic violence to Islam, when clearly the overwhelming majority of domestic violence is absolutely nothing to do with religion or religious scripture. So that's the first question. What do people think of that? You know, the fact that domestic violence has far more to do with gender inequality and to do with structural sexism than to do with religion. Secondly, we've really got to, the elephant in the room here, of course, is the context at the moment as to where this obsession with Islam at the moment comes from. It's not to do with, as Michael mentioned before, Islamism. If it was simply to do with Islamist attacks, then there'd be a campaign in the media at the moment against atheism, because the three people who were murdered in Chapel Hill recently, the three Muslim women who were murdered by someone who was inspired by Richard Dawkins, someone who considered himself a new atheist. But there's been no backlash against atheism as a result of that. So the context, of course, at the moment is the rise of a wave of Islamophobic violence across Europe at the moment. Michael might deny the existence of Islamophobia, but in France at the moment, the racist National Front are leading the polls at the moment. You've got the rise of the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn in Greece. This is the context for a wave of attacks against Muslims across this continent. And so the question of free speech really isn't an abstract one. Free speech has concrete consequences, when it can be acted upon to demonise and further marginalise one of the most already marginal groups in European society today. So in that sense, it's not just a, sorry, I'm really going on, a narrow legal question. I suppose I'd slightly disagree with Abdullah's emphasis on giving racist groups a platform. It absolutely mattered that, for instance, at Oxford, when Marine Le Pen tried to use the respectability of the Oxford Union as a platform to spout her racist views, that people demonstrated outside, outnumbered her, and also in Newcastle outnumbered Pegida by the tune of hundreds. Because it matters in terms of making sure that these bigoted ideas don't actually enter the mainstream of political discourse in society. To make sure that that we don't lump the Front National together with with any normal political party. These views are inherently conducive to hateful violence, and I think we have a responsibility as both Muslims and non-Muslims across Europe at the moment to make sure Islamophobia is nipped in the bud and doesn't take hold in Ireland.
Okay. Okay, first of all, I'm not sure, I didn't catch at the start, did you say that I had trivialised domestic violence?
Yeah, by linking domestic violence.
Yeah, I didn't raise that. I was responding to it being raised. The second thing is the Chapel Hill murders. Like you, I was obviously concerned about any murders, and I, particularly when reports came out that the murderer was allegedly an Islamophobic atheist. So I checked his website, and I would suggest that you do the same thing. And I checked various places that he operates online, and he's not Islamophobic. He's a Native American Republican who supports gun ownership. He supported the right of Muslims to build a mosque at Ground Zero, which was a very controversial position in America. He has many Muslim friends, and he says that he prefers his Muslim friends to Christians. And nothing in what he has written suggests that he has anything against Muslims. He is opposed to this is going back to the point I was making earlier. He's very strongly against religion as an idea. He is very friendly towards Muslims. Now, he also seems to be, I don't want to be assessing the man's state of mind, but he seems to have behaved very irrationally with regard to control freakery about parking outside his apartment, which is the trigger for that particular incident. He has been involved in a number of websites where he is obsessed about road traffic violations and parking violations, and he also has, because of America, has access to firearms. So that if you examine what has happened there, you will find that you have somebody who, I suspect, although he does almost say this, that as somebody who identifies ethnically as a Native American and supports the rights of minorities within America and therefore identifies with the rights of Muslims as a minority within America, you will find, if you actually go through his website, that far from being Islamophobic in terms of hating Muslims, that he dislikes the ideology. He doesn't dislike it as much as he dislikes Christianity, and he prefers Muslims to Christians.
So maybe ask where you got that from.
From his own website. He's a Facebook page, which people superficially jumped on and said, "Oh, his Facebook page says he's an atheist." Actually, his Facebook logo was "Atheists for Equality." Now, he is actually. I mean, he's obviously a very disturbed person, but he certainly didn't dislike Muslims. Or if he did, he wrote exactly the opposite everywhere that he was online. So have a look at his website, and you will find that, or his Facebook page. I'll send you the link.
No, I saw his Facebook. I saw his Facebook. I didn't see that on his Facebook page. I went systematically through all his posts, so I didn't see that.
Well, I've gone through it systematically, and I'll give you a link from my blog to an analysis. I went back to when he started on Facebook. And went through everything, because I believe in trying to find the evidence for something rather than assuming things. And you'll find that his problems were not as well. First of all, as I say, in terms of Islamophobia, I make a distinction between disliking the ideology, which I think is valid, and disliking the people, which I think isn't valid. But if you go through his Facebook page from the start, not only does he not dislike Muslims, he prefers Muslims to Christians.
Was that many years ago?
No, it's the last. Well, he's there about 5 years, but I mean, it's clear. It's a clear pattern, and as I say, he also, which is quite an unusual position for, or would be quite an unusual position for somebody who hates Muslims. He actively supported the building of a Muslim mosque near Ground Zero when there was controversy against that, and he did that on the basis of defending the rights of minorities.
Okay, well, I'll certainly check it. I mean, if this was what you say, then I think we should all check it out and find out for ourselves the veracity of that. Yeah. Though it doesn't necessarily mean he might not change his opinion later on, depending. But
yeah, well, you could equally say his biggest thing really was recently was supporting gay marriage, and yet nobody is saying, "Oh, here's this gay marriage supporter killing 3 heterosexuals." You know, I mean, you can't just jump on something that somebody is supporting and say that means that he hates people.
Well, okay, I mean, since turning this debate into what was the motivation of Craig Hicks, so, I mean, obviously we get this because this is what his family says. The evidence came to light that the people who he had
his family,
sorry, the family of the victim, sorry.
Okay.
And that on the day in question, there was actually no parking violations by the actual, they actually took his threats earlier on into account, and they avoided parking on any of the spaces they had issues with. So this is very recent now. It turned out there's actually the parking motive theory actually has been discounted. So maybe it was he just randomly picked people and out of all the neighbours, which were well-to-do but not Muslim, and it just happened to be about a unfortunate coincidence. But I think I will accept that. If this is what you found on his Facebook, then let's go and let's check it out and see for ourselves and see if there's anything there.
And the other thing I would add to that is, by the way, is because there's a kind of casual, even if you say that he was an atheist, even if you're saying that his atheism is responsible, there's that kind of casual throwing of inspired by Richard Dawkins, as if Richard Dawkins is somehow encouraging people to murder people. I mean, that's an outrageous linkage to say that he was inspired by Richard Dawkins. He has a list of quotes from at least 100 different atheists and politicians on his page, and there might be one from Richard Dawkins or two, if I remember correctly.
I mean, if you looked at his Facebook, he wasn't just saying I'm an atheist in the status bar and that was it. I mean, he was very fanatically anti-religion, like post after post after post after post.
Yes, but not anti-religious people. But not anti-religious people.
Oh yeah, well, I mean,
and in fact, pro the rights of Muslims.
Well, I think he was actually having a go at idiotic religious followers, and he would say, he put them in a bad light, perhaps, followers of religion too. But nothing that says kill all Christians or Muslims or whatever. Yeah, I would agree. He didn't say kill all of them, but I think.
But it's more than that. He defended the rights of Muslims. As a religious minority within America.
Well, I have to wait to see that.
Okay, well, I don't, because I've seen it, but I accept.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, this is new evidence you're bringing to light. So we'll check it out. But I just wanted to respond to something that the person said there about giving racists a platform. Now, at risk of being confused of being liberal, which I'm not, I'm quite the opposite. Or libertarian, or whatever you want to call it. I actually come from an Islamic basis from the matter, which is that no matter how horrific or disgusting or repellent you might find anyone's particular ideas, in the platform of debate or the arena of debate, all is acceptable, and everyone has a right to access that arena and engage their opinions. Because the only way you're ever going to refute racists or EDL or BNP is if you give them the right to speak and then give their opponent the right to refute them on publicly, and people see their ideas falling down. What they'll say if you don't give them that platform is that they are martyrs and that people are denying them the right to speak and so on, and it just makes them look better and stronger, and they get more supporters that way. So I'm actually all for, no matter how horrific. I mean, I said the BNP EDL, they were the most strongest people against Muslims. They were saying that basically Muslims are fifth columnists, we're evil, we're whatever, we're going to take over England and spread Sharia law or whatever. That's what they've been saying. And I thought the best way to tackle them is in the midst of everyone giving them a no platform, we'll give them the platform. And I also thought it was quite funny as well, because they were saying that Muslims hate criticism, yet the only people that would give them a platform are Muslims. And they didn't actually realize that, and so they accepted the invitation, and they had a difficulty explaining to their followers afterwards why only Muslims would give them the platform to criticize Islam and Muslims, when everybody else who was not Muslim wouldn't. So I think that I should give them a platform because they're going to spread anyway, you know, and no matter how small a minority of people are, I think everyone has a right to intellectual engagement, and you become the stronger for it, to see what, even if you're right and they're wrong, you become more aware of why you're right by testing it with their ideas or with their criticism. So I would disagree with that. But there is one point you mentioned about, and I agree with you, is that we shouldn't say, and I think it's wrong to say only Islamists would take offence at, let's say, the Charlie Hebdo cartoon, or portraying Prophet Muhammad with a bomb in his turban. All Muslims, irrespective of who they are, what sector they are, whatever, they took offence. But it wasn't necessarily just the offence taking that was the issue. It was the worrying trend of this portrayal of Muslims as being evil, savage, violent, and barbaric. Because if you treat people like that, you get many of those who are disenfranchised amongst the Muslim community will say, well, if we're going to be considered to be like this, we might as well act like this. I think there's a great quote from Shakespeare. The Shylock said, "You treated me like a dog before you had cause, so now I will bear my fangs." You see, it's a bit of Shakespeare. So it's not just with the Muslims. In America, you had, I think the police discriminate against black people. And then you had people, some black people were shot, and then in response, this one guy, in his anger and his rage, he shot 2 policemen. It was a black person, he shot 2 policemen. Does that mean that there's a problem in the black community, or the black community are predisposed to violence? No, it doesn't. In fact, unfortunately, it's a human reality of hatred, demonization, injustice, causing a reaction of more injustice, and it just perpetuates injustice in the world, and I think it's wrong. Obviously, I think killing the 2 policemen is wrong, and killing the innocent black people who weren't armed by the police is also wrong as well. So it's got nothing to do with Islamism. It's got everything to do with humans and human nature, unfortunately. And I think that we should condemn all injustices across the board, but also pay attention to the plight of the Muslims in France, who they can't express themselves. Women can't express themselves by wearing the niqab. They can't go to school, be educated, wearing what you wear here. They don't have, women here with hijab won't have this right in France, in good old free speech France or free expression France. It doesn't exist. And of course, you insult the French anthem, the French flag. Even apparently the French president is actually illegal to do so in France. So their pretensions of free speech is just media showboating and trying to claim that they're the moral high ground. They don't. They criminalize people. They arrest people. And I think that perpetuates injustice amongst the Muslim community. And some amongst them, like you had in the black community in America, will take matters into their own hands and do injustices as well. It doesn't justify what they did, but they so victimized they feel that they will react in the wrong way, in completely the wrong way. And no matter how much as Muslims we preach, I say to many of my platforms that we should always not be violent. We should always react in a way that is better and more enlightened way. You're always going to find people, generally Muslims who are actually not religious, who react very violently. According to many of the reports on extremism, so-called radicalization reports, they've actually shown the evidence is opposite. The more irreligious a Muslim is, the more likely they are to commit acts of terrorism or violence. And the more religious they are, the more knowledgeable they are in Islam, the less likely they are to commit acts of terrorism. So the problem is really, it's us trying to suppress a human problem that's happening using religion. But obviously we can't force every Muslim to be good Muslims, and you'll get some who will go outside Islamic law and go outside, will be outlaws and do bad things.
I have a question for Mr. Abdullah. At the beginning of your speech, you said that we are going to discuss about free speech and we should put restrictions to free speech because religion is considered by some people as part of their identity. So if you are offending their religion, you are offending them.
No, gratuitous insult, not offense. I don't like the word offense. It's too unclear and vague.
But I just want you to clarify for me. There's a surah, there's Surah Al-Jum'ah, which is translated as a Friday surah. And the 5th verse in that surah, it says that those who are entrusted with the Torah which is the book of Jews, as everyone knows, and who do not take it on are like donkeys. So, could you please clarify for me, because I'm a bit confused. Is it what is the intent, since you spoke about the intent of insulting? Is this an insult, or what is it meant by this?
Well, actually, there's also narration by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I will answer that verse, but let me just show you where it's used elsewhere, referring to basically Muslims who claim to be scholars or learned people, and they don't act according to knowledge of what they possess. They too are donkeys. It's actually referring to anyone who's knowledgeable and doesn't act according to the knowledge they have. They are and not understanding of that knowledge. They are like donkeys who carry books. Finish the quote.
Yeah.
Donkeys, because a donkey doesn't carrying books. Just because it's carrying books doesn't mean that it knows what's in the books, right? And it's showing that it's by not being enlightened by the books. It just behaves it just behaves as an animal. What distinguishes us from animals is knowledge and enlightenment. So it's not an issue about Jews there. Jews weren't mentioned as Jews are like donkeys. No. It didn't say those of the Torah are donkeys. No, it does not say that. It refers to anyone who is meant to be learned, but does not act according to what they know. They're just like a donkey carrying books. The books don't benefit the donkey at all whatsoever, and nor does it benefit anyone else, just being on the back of the donkey. And according to the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, his sayings, he also referred to that to anyone else. So it's just a saying about. It's actually not about Jews. It's about people who claim to be scholars of knowledge, and yet they're not benefited by their knowledge.
So you think that the term donkey is not insulting?
An insulting term.
Insulting.
Well, it's clearly not. It's
in my culture, if you call someone a donkey, that's very insulting.
Well, if someone particularly, if it says Bob, this guy called Bob here, he's a donkey, then that would be perhaps insulting, yes. But it's not. It's a very general, almost a parable or a metaphor. Really, it's a metaphor, really. So there's nothing insulting about a metaphor.
Can I address that? I think it's one of the problems with religion generally is that because religion bases its views about reality and morality on these sacred texts, every time something comes up, an interpretation has to be created that crowbars the new information into what was written several hundred years ago. And instead of just being able to say, I suspect if that wasn't in the Quran, and if somebody had asked you, say, Joe Smith said that Jews are donkeys, you'd go, that's a terrible thing to say. You know,
he didn't quote it.
I understand.
Say that.
Okay, I understand. I'm saying pretend it's not in the Quran.
Bring up the quote?
I understand that. Pretend it's not in the Quran. Okay, pretend it's not in the Quran. Right. Pretend that it's in Charlie Hebdo. Okay, and that somebody has said in Charlie Hebdo that Jews are who are carrying the Torah are donkeys. I suspect that you, as if it wasn't in the Quran, your instinct would be to say, yeah, no, that based on what you've been saying about insulting people, would say, yeah, I think Charlie Hebdo got it wrong there. I don't think that they should have compared Jews to donkeys, even in that metaphorical way. But because it's in the Quran, you have to find a way of reconciling this statement, which would otherwise be an insult elsewhere.
It's not in the Quran, though. It's just a straw man arguing.
Okay, whatever.
Bring me an example in the Quran, and we can discuss it.
Okay. Well, I'll give you an example from the Quran that
you say is deliberately insulting.
Well, not that I say it's deliberately insulting, but that illustrates the point that I'm making. Is in the there's a verse in the Quran that says that you're to flog adulterers. Okay. And it gives the
fornicators,
fornicators, adulterers, and if you flog them 100 times, and then it says after that, don't let your compassion for them prevent you from doing it, because you have to do what Allah said. I'm paraphrasing roughly, but I'm sure you remember the verse. Okay, now to me, what that suggests is that there was something in the Quran, there was something in the original version. You have to flog these people, and it seems likely to me, as somebody who doesn't believe in Allah, obviously you have a different belief if you believe that Allah wrote it or dictated it, but it seems to me likely that this instruction to flog people, that people who were using their compassion were going, that doesn't really seem right. It seems disproportionate. I don't want to do that. And in fact, the other bit is not only don't let your compassion stop you, but also you have to do it in public, so that it's clear that it has been done. Okay, so it seems to me that there are things like that where these sacred texts corrupt what would be our normal morality. That normally, if it wasn't in the text, you would look at certain things and go, and you just use your own compassion and empathy and fairness and reciprocity and cooperation and justice, and you would say, I would come to this conclusion that shouldn't be done. But if somebody says, but it says in the Quran, or if you're a Christian, it says in the Bible, then suddenly you have to spend this huge amount of intellectual energy in trying to reconcile what you might otherwise believe with what's written there, instead of being able to say, there's a lot of good stuff in that book, but they got some things wrong.
Okay, well, first and foremost, this is on a tangent. This is actually red herring to the actual discussion we're trying to have, because this is about legal laws and what the Quran says about legal laws. The example that was brought up, he actually didn't cite the actual quote. If someone could please cite the actual quote. If people actually hear the actual quote, it's not actually what it says, the paraphrasing of what it says. So there's really red herring in this matter. But even on the issue of the punishment for public fornication, not for people who fornicate in private, but people who go out and actually have sex in public. Okay, it's prohibited under Irish law and UK law too. You can't go have sex in public. That
wasn't the point I was making.
I know, but I saw this story about this US soldier, and it showed him as a very human person, who made a few mistakes in Iraq, and he seemed very sad and depressed and about it, and he's like, and very regretful of some of the mistakes he's made, and it's like, and you see it, and you go, oh, poor guy, what did he do? He was in Hadifa. He shot an entire family and raped a girl. I think it was a 9 or 10-year-old girl, and then shot her afterwards. That's what he did. But if you see him and how sad he looks, you'd feel, oh, poor guy. He seemed to have. He says that he wasn't he didn't want to go to Iraq, or he didn't want to. He was sick and tired of it. He was depressed. He had mental issues, perhaps. Oh, poor guy. But when you see what he did, and someone says to you as the prosecutor in the case against him, if you were the court prosecutor, and you say, oh, he seems so regretful, and they say, look, don't let compassion prevent you from doing your job. He did something that was bad, and so his punishment, which is life imprisonment, or I think it was just life imprisonment or whatever, that's what he has to do. That's what has to happen to him. So in Islam, we view public fornication as a very egregious crime. It's not execution or capital punishment per se. It's just flogging and so on. You might say that's just flogging. Well, yeah, because it's not execution, is it? It's not killing the person.
Well, that's a kind of low hurdle really for ethical behaviour. He's not killing them.
Well, I would say it's better than putting people into human zoos like prisons and so on, and depriving them of their family for years. I think that's actually more inhumane.
Yeah, or just saying, or you just say, okay, you had sex, now go home and enjoy yourself.
No, it's not that. It's basically from the Islamic perspective, a person that commits fornication is not only attacking the institution of marriage, but because we don't believe that humans own their own bodies, or God owns us. It would be akin to sex without consent, because the owner of the body is God, and you don't have God's consent, and hence it's sex without consent. That's why it's very egregious in our moral worldview. But whether you agree with that or not, I'm not asking a secular person to agree with that perspective, and I'm certainly not advocating that for Britain or any country. I'm saying that this is what the Islamic understanding is, in an Islamic state of which Muslims have consented to basically implement the Islamic law. So really, the law is by consent by Muslims, and we consent to live under such a law by establishing a state, which is a different.
Yeah,
matter.
Well, other than the people who are fornicating, as you put it, are having sex, as I would
in
put
public,
it,
not in private.
Okay, but they obviously
public
by definition they haven't consented to that law because they feel that law is wrong, and then it comes down to what if
don't people break their promises?
What comes down to is what is a proportionate response to it. But to a certain extent, the key point that I was making that I don't want to get dragged too far away from is the primacy of these texts and looking at them. Like if somebody says to me, if you had said to me, should you call Jews donkeys? I wouldn't go, well, Dawkins 4:67 says, I would just give you my opinion. We don't rely on what somebody wrote down
But that's more arbitrary, though. It could shift. I could point to the oft-cited example, of course, of certain countries in the last century, or even now, of which it's become popular to hate a certain minority based on their race or their religion or their skin color, and because it became such in vogue, it was deemed to be moral to do bad things to those people. So I don't want to put more. Forgive me if I don't put stock in human beings being the arbiters of their own morality, because they generally choose to be very nasty to other people if they make themselves the arbiters of morality. Now, just to go back a bit, we're not discussing here what should be the punishments for fornicators, by the way.
Yeah,
this debate is not about that. That's for a different discussion. We're talking about issue of free speech. And I'm actually arguing from an Islamic perspective, because I think that the Islamic perspective on this matter is something that people can generally agree and accept, which is that intellectual critique should be allowed. Gratuitous insult against which it impinges the dignity of human beings and should have some restriction. Now, we agree with that in principle on many other things. My only argument today has always been, let's just be consistent about it. And just because a person might not have a religion or be anti-theist or against religion does not mean now that they should be selective or discriminatory, saying this applies for everyone else except those people because I have an issue with them. I think I'm only trying to advocate for consistency in applying the principles.
Well, can I ask you one other question? I'm sure we're probably close to time, but when you were saying that God determines, when you were talking about the fornication, I presume that carries wider. God determines things, and humans are incapable of wisely interpreting anything other than what God says, okay, or not interpreting of deciding outside of what God says.
I'm saying what David Hume says, which is often human morality is based on their tastes, and do you really want to trust the taste of potentially wacky people?
Okay,
charismatic?
Well, let's take that. Well, you see, the difficulty there is that some people will consider some Islamic teachings. No, I didn't say people. Some Islamic teachings to be wacky. And they're free to have that opinion. Exactly. So what you come down to, and this is the key. What I was saying at the start in my first contribution is who determines. If you have your God telling you this, somebody else is their God telling you something else. Somebody else has David Icke telling him that George Bush is a space lizard. Okay, so and then you've atheists saying, well, we just look at it on the basis of evidence. So with all of those things in a pluralist society, who determines, in your view? Like, does the Islamic perspective get precedence, or how is the balance and the compromises to be teased out?
Okay, well, it depends. It would depend on the social context. So, in a let's say Muslims in a Western society, we are under a covenant or contract with the citizen contract, as Rousseau would say. So we abide by the laws, and if we have any issues, we would advocate for it. But really, even under Islamic law, we don't impose Sharia law, Sharia on non-Muslims. So Christians don't have to give up eating pork, and historically never gave up eating pork or drinking wine under Islamic states. In medieval Iraq, you had pig farms in Christian areas because that was what they wanted to do. So Sharia is not for those people who don't believe in it and are not Muslim. And so that's why I say it was by...
Depending on the country, obviously. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia.
I'm not going to talk about post-colonial secular creations. I'm only talking about what Islam was before the British came. And we're not the only country the British colonialized, right? So I'm only going to talk about what was applied in Islamic history under Islamic laws. And under Islamic laws, you had open debate, open discussion, and so on. And the people were free to criticize, to make even strong invective. Even if you see some of the translations written in Arabic, originally written by Christians in Arabic and by Jews in Arabic, about what they say about Islam, you think, wow, some of this stuff probably wouldn't even be allowed in England.
But they were allowed back then. I assume on the basis of what you're saying that you're among these. Where are the reformers of modern, what Islam has turned into, that would bring it back to what you're talking about in terms of what you're saying it was?
Well, herein lies the problem, because the people who want, not reform, but want to revive pre-colonial Islamic understanding are called Islamists, because they say, oh, you're mixing politics with Islam, and this is Islamism. But yet, for 1,300 years, Muslims weren't secular. They were not. The Islamic caliphates were not secular institutions. Yet they were institutions where you had the flowering of science, the flowering of discussion, you had plurality, pluralism, you had multiculturalism and so on under strictly Islamic regimes, strictly Sharia regimes. Yet if any Muslim talks about reviving such a situation, you're called an Islamist and you're called an aberration. So those who are counter-revivalists are not only the Muslim regimes themselves who arrest and imprison Islamists, quote-unquote Islamists, but also the Western governments which support these regimes, happily not Ireland, so you guys are wise, but they support these Western dictators which are secular, like President Sisi, Bashar al-Assad, before Saddam Hussein, before he fell foul of American foreign policy, and many others. And herein lies the problem. We're prevented from actually changing our countries and returning it back to a much more enlightened state as it were. And this is what we're trying to do. But
so you think the key has gone back to Islam, as, first of all, as being a combination of a religion and political system and judicial system combined, but without the policies that some Islamic states or some states today that say they are Islamic are
it's not a combination of anything. It's just a way of life. Only after secularism did they compartmentalize ways of life into what is a spiritual belief, almost a Protestant understanding of religion, and then a public religion, which they said that should be separate from life's affairs. That came after secularism, but all civilizations weren't secular. Like the Hindus would never call themselves Hindus. They said they were following the Dharma, which means law. Torah means also law. You see, so people.
In the meantime, given that that's unlikely to happen in countries where Muslims are a minority.
This is in the main tangent from the discussion.
Well, no, I think it's because it is the fundamental underpinnings of the attitudes that we're talking about in terms of freedom of expression. In the meantime, is it possible for Muslim revivalists, to use your term, to try to within a democratic pluralist society to try to campaign for those things that you think should be implemented under an enlightened caliphate, but try to get them implemented under a democracy, under a secular democracy?
Well, no, because it's a non-Muslim country. Why would we want the laws to change for non-Muslims to be Sharia? Because they don't believe in the basis for Sharia. Would be absurd.
So, but I thought your argument was that there were elements of Sharia that are that in terms of the way that it used to be implemented pre-colonialism, presumably then are different to how they're implemented post-colonialism. So what are those differences?
Well, okay, I think we're getting off
yeah,
topic
but it's
here.
interesting.
So, okay, well, we can have this discussion over coffee afterwards. But my discussion here today actually I have not advanced any Islamic evidence. I haven't advanced any verse of the Quran saying you should have this understanding about free speech because the verse of the Quran says. I haven't said this today. Just because I'm Muslim, you brought up the issue, and obviously he brought up the issue about the Quran.
Yeah, but it is an Islamic
even
society
if I was,
that has invited us here.
It's irrelevant. Islamic society can have debates on anything they want.
Sure.
But I'm not coming at this advocating you to accept the Islamic basis in order to understand my position. I'm saying this position itself is reasonable for any person to understand when you have principles, right? The Quran says to us Muslims that we're not to argue with the people of the book or Judeo-Christian civilization or whatever you want to, or its descendants, unless we witness injustice. And injustice is really anyone contradicts their own principles, right? So if you're being consistent with your own principles, even if they're wrong, but I say, all right, fine, at least you're being just as you think it to be. But if you contradict your own principles or you selectively apply them on what you give a privilege to one and you don't give you don't give the same to others, then this is where we can raise issues. So the only point I'm here to say is that we protect so much in terms of human dignity for many different identity groups, which we now define as identity group, which I would say is just superficial, such as race or gender and so on. I would say that the mind, the human soul of the individual is much more fundamental to their being than just the superficialities of their external shell, or just a particular preference in only one area of their life. So I'm arguing that let's be consistent on the matter. You don't have to accept Sharia. You can think that the Sharia punishment for fornication is wacky. Please do so if that's what you want to believe. But we're not discussing these matters. We're not discussing Islam. We're discussing purely the idea that if you already accept that there is restrictions on speech, on speech which is not necessarily inciting violence, then just be consistent about it. If someone came to me and said, I don't care about any restriction, whether you want to incite hatred, you want to demonize, you want to remove people's dignity, do so, I would say, well, at least you're being consistent about that. But now you have accepted the principle that that's not the case, not that super libertarian idea, then let's just be consistent about it, and that's my only argument here today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and I think even though we have strayed a bit from the actual topic, I think that kind of serendipity can be useful for discussion, and it's one of the reasons that I prefer these type of formats than just simply having, two people debating, trying to defeat the other in a debate. So I think it's been quite a useful discussion. I'll just say I think we have quite a lot in common in approaches to certain issues. Obviously, we have. I think our big difference comes back to that you believe that you are getting your sense of reality and morality from Allah, and I don't. And obviously, that's going to mean that we diverge fairly quickly in terms of the underpinning of what it is we're trying to promote. And then the question becomes, what criteria do we use to determine these freedom of expression issues in a society where people have different underpinnings for whatever their beliefs are?
Well, I would finish off by saying that while my basis for my morality is perhaps different from yours, I think there is a common universal language of checking for consistency in a person's belief. So, and the Quran says, had the Quran been from anything other than God, you would have found inconsistency in it. Now, whether that's true or not is a different discussion. But what I do in debates, such as certainly political philosophy debates, and I think this comes within the realm of political philosophy to some extent, is to show or highlight inconsistencies in a person's belief. Whether they want to believe something I might not necessarily believe in, if it's fully consistent worldview system, I can't fault it. But if there is inconsistencies, it must be false. There must be a problem within it, or it can't be true, whatever basis you might take, whether you're a communist, you're a liberal, or whether you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or whatever. So today, my discussion, as I said, going back to it again, is that I only tried to highlight inconsistencies. But if someone came here today and said, I don't feel that any restriction on speech is required, maybe except incitement to harm, but if they want to be really consistent and say that humans always have the moral responsibility, whatever whispers in your ear, then you should be consistent and say that any speech, including incitement to violence, should be allowed, because just by inciting someone to violence doesn't mean they're going to be violent, right? You could say that, and I would say, you know what, you're consistent. I would say you're inconsistent with human nature, what you're saying, but you're consistent in your beliefs and so on. And that's really all I've been trying to argue today when I discuss what you call political philosophy ideas, is consistency. And I think that's a universal basis to show if something's right or wrong. Yeah. Khalasat? Yeah.
I think a round of applause for both our speakers. That was a fantastic debate, mashallah. Brother Abdullah, and thank you very much, Michael Nugent. Hopefully everyone here will be able to take something home with them from the debate, as well as have learned something new here. As I think this is a perfect opportunity, inshallah. Go ahead.
I just want to say two facts. It's not questions or anything. Me as a Muslim person, wearing the headscarf, before anyone knows me, if I get insulted by anyone insults Islam, the first person, whenever someone sees me, the first thing they see me, before they know my personality, before they know my name, they know I'm Muslim, and if they insult my Islam, they insult me. The second thing I want to say is, when this is a personal experience, when most of our parents came from the Middle East, they came because they weren't allowed to practice their religion in their actual countries. They came here and they were put on the wanted list in their actual countries. Then after 9/11, those practicing Muslims were put on the wanted list for being wanted for being Al-Qaeda members or terrorists, suspected terrorists or so on, which there was no evidence, nothing, but their names were put on lists, their passports were taken off them, they were put on the UN list, so if they traveled, they were immediately arrested and put in Guantanamo. My dad, personally, his freedom of speech was taken off him. He was a journalist and he had a charity leave. Both were closed down. He was not allowed to write any articles. France knew that whatever Charlie Hebdo was doing was violent because he was making stuff that was against Islam, against people's views, but they did not stop him. They didn't stop anything, and they've seen what happened in Paris coming because they knew he was spreading violence, but they didn't do anything. Why is it when it comes to a person with a beard, a person that is Muslim, they take off from all the freedom of speech, and then when it comes to Charlie Hebdo, oh, it's freedom of speech. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much. Okay, so